back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to review the next 5 SBFBO books that I was reading. I have read 5 more since I last updated you, and I wanted to let you know a little bit about each of them and tell you what I thought, and hopefully get you guys excited to go and read some of them. If you don't know what SBFBO is and you're not sure what I'm talking about, then do go and check out my announcement video and also check out some of the links down below where you can find out loads more information. SBFBO stands for Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off, and this year I am one of the judges. So in order to judge, I have to read 30 books and choose my favourites to go forwards as the finalists. So as part of that, these next 5 are my next 5 books that I read, and let's just launch straight in. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called Song, and this is by Jessie Teller. This one is one that I was a little bit disappointed by because I love the cover of this, and I thought it would be a book that would be kind of up my alley. It sounded like something that really would have worked for me a little bit better than it actually did. So the story for this one follows 2 main characters. We have Conan, who is a bounty hunter character, and then we have Rafe, who is a prison guard slash super awesome wizard character. The 2 of them are the focus of the story, and as the story goes on we sort of jump around their points of view, getting to know not just what's going on in the present day but also a bit of their backstories and kind of who they are and where they came from and what they're working towards. I do think that their backstories were pretty interesting and made you think quite a lot, but unfortunately for me I just found them to be kind of average flat characters, and I didn't really connect with them in the same way that I hope to and want to when I'm reading fantasy. The story itself is largely set in the city of Song, and although we do get some world building on this city and what it is like, I kind of wanted a little bit more. I feel like this is a very quick read, and therefore we didn't get the time to settle into the story in the same way that some fantasy books give us a bit more, and that's probably the author's choice. But personally I just felt it lacked a little bit more of development. For me it just didn't stand out quite enough from other sort of classic fantasy worlds, and although the magic is pretty interesting, I didn't feel like there was something calling to me or making me really remember this book over another one. Some of the creatures in this world are pretty interesting, and the characters, you have some characters and creatures who can't be viewed unless they have clothing on, others who are sort of great magical spirit beings and they control the prison that Rafe is supposedly guarding and helping, and the prison itself can change daily to kind of reconfigure to make sure all the beings who are trapped inside don't escape, although at the crux of the story is an escaped magical being. And we also get to see deities interact with our characters, so it's not just the mortals, we are seeing gods as they kind of interact with our main characters and what they can bring to the story. Overall, it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. It was fascinating at times, and then at other times it didn't really feel that memorable or that much like it was standing out from the rest of the books I've read. I gave it a 2.5 in the end, which is very much middle of the road. It's 5 stars out of 10 for SBFBO purposes, but it just didn't really feel as memorable as I wanted, and I just feel like there was a lot more that could have been done with the world, and I hope that maybe that's done later in the series, because I think this is only the first one in a series. But for me it just didn't really draw me in, and I can't see myself returning to the world really. The next book I ended up reading was Wolfgang, and this one again is a book that is a little bit different than some of the others in here. It's actually a vampire hunter story, which is a pretty cool concept. I personally don't love vampire stories, so when I heard it was about a vampire hunter I was quite up for that, and I definitely feel like this is a pretty badass hunter that we're following. He's called Wolfgang, hence the name of the book, and he has, at the very start of the book, actually gone and killed a very, very old vampire lord. So we follow the sort of prelogue where he does this, and then we go back and we see what's happened since then and how he lives with his family and what he does on a kind of day-to-day basis. However, very early on in the book we see as Wolfgang goes home to his family after going out and hunting, actually his family have been killed and taken, and he needs to go and hunt down the remaining survivors and try and find them, and he knows that it is going to be down to the vampires that they have been taken. So it's all about him trying to go and fight against the evil of this world, which does happen to be the vampires, and also going on this quest essentially to go and find his son and find out what's happened to him and where he's been taken to and who by. And it's pretty battle heavy, this book. It's definitely all about Wolfgang being a complete badass, hence the title. And for me, that's just kind of only a part of my story. I would rather have seen more than just him fighting. And I do think you get snippets where we see a bit more of his personality, a bit more of the regret he has, and a bit more of the sadness that he has over losing his son and losing his family. And I really wanted a bit more of that kind of character reflection, and some of those moments were really, really good, but I just don't feel there were enough. The world itself was of minimally developed. I think it's, again, kind of any fantasy world it could have been, except obviously there's vampires. But it just didn't feel fleshed out as much as some of the other books I've read, and I do think that although the character is there and bits of his personality come through, he feels very much like a killing machine most of the book. He can just come back from anything, he's almost invincible, he always manages to get out of a scrape, and it just doesn't feel as believable as some of the other characters I've read before. So personally, again, I had issues with it. It was a fun story, the action is intense, and you're definitely not going to be bored whilst reading this because it is very much fast-paced, exciting fantasy. And if you like vampire killing, then maybe it's for you. But I just don't think it stood out, again, enough from some of the other books I've read in a similar vein. So for me, I ended up giving this a 2.5, again, out of 5 stars, which equates to 5 out of 10 for SBFBO. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that I would carry on reading this series either. Next up, I read Thief of Sparks, which is by Erik Ken Edstrom, and this one is one that I definitely misjudged from the start of the book. So the cover is really cool, but I thought this was going to be a very stereotypical thieving book, and it kind of is. It starts out very stereotypically. It follows a young girl who is thieving to try and make money in order to get medicine for her brother, which is very much a standard trope, I feel like. But as the story goes on, you realise that the thing she ends up stealing is actually a cat, and in this world, cats are banned. They are considered evil, people are scared of them, people never really want to get near them. But actually it turns out that a lot of this is lies that have been spread around by the people in charge so that others do not interact with cats and discover their magical powers. Now, I love cats. I have a cat and I love her, and I really enjoy stories where cats are the main focus, so this was definitely going to be my cup of tea, and it is. I found that I really enjoyed the interaction that the cats in the story had with our main characters. We follow a girl called Kyla, who is our main character, and her brother, and each of them kind of gets their own cat very early on, and they have to protect these cats along with the other people they meet at the time who also have cats, and they have a way of communicating sort of in their minds with the cats, and the cats are really sarcastic, which I love because I think all cats are a bit like that in reality. They kind of do their own thing and they don't really listen to humans or take note of anything you say because that's just a cat way to do it. And I really like it. I think it was good fun. It was an easy read. It was something that I found quite predictable at times, but that didn't put me off because I still found it to be a really funny, entertaining read at times too. And I think the characters are definitely a bit more developed than some of the others I've read, and I like that as well. It's a fairly stereotypical fantasy world. There's nothing hugely out of the ordinary there, and I don't think the characters feel that old. I feel like they are kind of young adult characters in the book, so maybe that's something to consider if you are going to pick it up. But personally, it's a light, easy read, and I enjoyed it enough to give it a 3 out of 5 stars, which equates to a 6 out of 10 for SBFBO. The next book I read is called Hostile Takeover, and this one, I have to say before I start even talking about it, is a book that I would never normally read because I do not tend to pick up crime fantasy, and I would kind of say that this is that. If you read the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, then I think you would love this series, or at least this book in the series, because it is very, very reminiscent of the Dresden Files and what Jim Butcher has done. However, it does have its own take on sort of who the detective is and what they're doing, and in this one we are following a PI who is called Bellamy Vale, and Bellamy is kind of our main character throughout the book, and Bellamy is actually kind of evading death when we meet him. He is a character who has made a deal with Lady Macbeth, and that is that he cannot die, or at least he manages to always evade death as long as he is able to work for her and basically do whatever she wants in terms of solving crimes and being her kind of envoy on Earth. He's kind of told at the start of the book by Lady Macbeth that a string of murders is taking place and he needs to go and investigate who's doing it and why. Presumably it's tied to the supernatural in some way rather than to the mundane, and so he gets involved with figuring out exactly what is going on and trying to uncover the mystery of who is doing the killings and why they're doing it and where they came from, which, as I say, is probably to do with the supernatural. Along the way, we also meet Bale's friends, who are people who have gods as parents, people on the police team, things like that, and they're all quite interesting characters as well in their own right. So I do think in terms of characterization, this was a much better book than some of the others I've mentioned, because it did give you a lot of insight into the character of Bellamy. However, again, I still feel like it wasn't quite enough for me to fully connect to the character. I could sympathise with them and I could kind of follow their story and understand their motivation, but I still didn't feel like I really got behind the character. And I think for me that might just be because I'm not a huge fan of crime fantasy. Like I say, I tend to find crime fantasies can be quite predictable in a way, and I don't really like that about them. I find that it's very much following a pattern and a stereotype, and P.I. Bellamy Vale does indeed fall into the stereotype of a private investigator and what they do and how they act and just their sort of mental attitude. And I kind of would have liked to see someone a little bit different, a little bit breaking the mould. I think that might have made me a bit more into the book. As a whole, it is an exciting read, and I think the second half was much stronger than the first in terms of development. Again, it's the first one in a series, so there is a lot of exposition, but I think the story and the action keeps this one going a bit better than some of the others, and we do get more fleshing out of this because obviously it is our world with supernatural elements kind of thrown in rather than some of the others. So I enjoyed it. I definitely thought it was good fun, and it surprised me in that I don't tend to read it. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, which equates to a 7 for SBFBO. Not a bad read, and definitely one that I think people who enjoy the Dresden Files will really, really like. So well worth checking out if that is you. And the final book I want to talk about in this review today is called Harkworth Hall, and this one is actually one of my favourites so far for SBFBO, and that is because I feel like the tone of this book really, really worked for me. It's quite a dark, kind of creepy undertone throughout the entire read, and that's something I didn't necessarily expect whilst I was picking up this one. Obviously the cover is a little bit creepy, but I wasn't sure what I was heading into with it because I don't like to read the blurbs too much before going in. I kind of just like the books to surprise me. And with this one, we're following a young woman called Caroline, and it's set in a time period where England has nobility, and Caroline and her father have kind of slightly fallen on hard times. They are living in Harkworth Hall, but they haven't really got an awful lot of money. Caroline is kind of chipping in with the servants to help them make money and keep them afloat. And her father doesn't really know this, but he kind of gets a sense of it, I think. And her father's quite elderly, and she knows that it's only really her marriage that is going to probably help them get out of the debt and the sort of bad situation that they found themselves in. So throughout the book we have this quite creepy undertone. We see Caroline as she meets up with her friend who tells her that there's this new man in town, and her father comes back one day telling her about this new man in town, and all of them seem to be raving about him and saying how wonderful and magnificent he is and how much of a great husband he would make her. So she's quite dubious to start off with whether or not this man will be someone she even likes, and when she does initially meet him she does get a bad feeling about him. But as the story goes on, she actually not only gets the bad feeling, she also gets warnings from other characters about the nefarious deeds that this Sir Edward Masterson is supposedly part of. And it's rumoured that he has killed people in the past, it's rumoured that he's been involved in nefarious deeds, and no one really will tell her the truth. Everyone around her seems to be almost hypnotised by this man and his sort of charm, and so it's only really Caroline who is kind of seeing a little bit through his disguise, or maybe she's just going a little bit and judging too harshly. People aren't really sure, and it's not until a young girl from the village goes missing that Caroline has to go in search of her and finds out what is really going on. So as I say, this has a dark undertone. I feel like it's a little bit gothic in style. We have these big old houses that Caroline goes and flaws, and we have the sort of hoi polloi of high society in the background as well, which makes it even more kind of sinister that there are plots and things going on. It's all about money, and people only look up to those who have money in the story, so it's definitely a big factor in whether or not she will marry. And I really enjoyed the kind of taking a classic story of a young woman in this time period who would have to choose whether she kind of pleases her family or not, and making it a little bit more creepy and sinister. And there is a kind of monster character in this as well later on, so it is fantasy, but it definitely feels more gothic and creepy than some of the other reads, and I think the atmosphere was a big factor in what I liked about it. And Caroline as a character gets developed quite a lot, so that was also good. And the world itself, it is obviously set in our sort of history, but there is that atmosphere the whole time, so I think it's really, really well done. And for that reason I gave this a 3.75, which equates to a 7.5 out of 10 for SBFBO purposes. So I did really enjoy this one. Thank you so much all of you for watching, and thanks to the authors for sending me your books. I have really enjoyed reading what I've read so far, and I am currently progressing on with the rest of the list, so there will be more reviews coming soon. I'm intending to kind of speed up my SBFBO reading a little bit over the next month or two, because I want to try and get some more reviews out to you guys. So that is everything I have to say. Do let me know your comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.